We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to another edition of AVRant. I'm Tom Andry, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AVRant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. And YouTube made some sneaky changes there last week. They tried to by default insert mid-roll ads in everybody's videos because they changed the defaults without telling anybody or putting a little pop-up or anything like that. So thankfully, it was caught and shouldn't have had any mid-roll ads in our YouTube video last week. But yeah, that's YouTube. They are monsters. But here we are anyway because it's the easiest way to stream live for me because I don't know how to do anything.
Yeah, we're gonna have to switch to like Zoom or something.
Well,
that was just gonna have to.
Laziness keeps me here. But anyway,
That's right, inertia.
oh, absolutely, definitely,
Why change the thing I'm doing when the thing I'm doing is still working?
pretty much.
No matter how much I know, no matter how inconvenient.
I
it
believe
might
that
be.
is YouTube's strategy at this point.
It is. All right. Well.
Yeah.
This is AVRant, the podcast that answers your home theater and AV questions. To get your questions answered, all you have to do is ask. Excuse me. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. You go to avrant.com, leave a comment there, facebook.com/avrantpodcast, youtube.com/avrant. You can hit us up directly, rob@avrant.com. His Twitter's @FirstReflect. I'm Tom at avrant.com. Email I have not checked since I got a new computer. I am terrified to try to transfer over all those emails from my Mac to my PC. I like every guide I've read that tells me how to do it. Just sounds like, oh yeah, all you gotta do is do this and then download this tool and then do that and then do this other thing and then it's
All
fine.
you gotta do. What could possibly go wrong with something like that?
Well, I've got like four different email addresses all going into the same email box, and then I've got like extra email boxes that I've just used as sort of a sorting method, and I don't know how any of that. It sounds like I have to do each one of those individually, which just sounds like more work than I'm willing to do. Like, just
Well,
more work. So what I should do?
You got last week's show notes somehow, so that much worked. That much reached you.
Oh yeah, it's because you sent it to my Gmail account
I do.
as well. That Gmail account I get everywhere.
It's a backup.
So. AVRant, Tom at avrant.com, Twitter @FirstReflect. No, I'm at avrant_Tom.
You are.
All right, let's talk about our listeners of the week. To become a listener of the week, you can support the podcast in some way. One of the ways you can do that is by going to patreon.com/avrantpodcast and signing up to be a continuing subscriber or a continuing supporter of the podcast. Every month, they'll take some money from you and give it to us. We now have 124 patrons, down from 125 last week. Number 125, where are you?
That's right.
We miss you. And your $1 a month.
Somebody saw the charge appear on their statement there at the beginning of August, and like, oh crap, I didn't mean to keep giving them money. But for the people who do intend to keep giving us money, we appreciate it very much. Over at patreon.com/AVRant podcast, if you'd like to sign up for an ongoing, continuing monthly donation.
And if you let us know that you're one of our subscribers over there, we will mention you on the podcast. So to do that, we will mention Carl, Tom, not me, different guy, and Nelson. So thank you, Carl, Tom, Nelson, and the other 121 patrons over at patreon.com.
For sure, Carl, Tom, Nelson, thank you for being amongst our 124 patrons. And if anybody would like to make a one-time donation and they don't want it to automatically continue every month, you can do so via PayPal, which you can reach by coming to our website, avrant.com, and over on the right-hand side, it says support AVRant with a picture of a cup of coffee, and that'll take you to PayPal. So no PayPal donations this week, but if you'd like to do that, that's how you do it, avrant.com.
If you can't support us financially, we completely understand. So just tell us what you did to support us, and we will mention you. So Carl bought a refurbished Denon X8500H receiver from Accessories for Less and let them know we recommended them. His X7200WA is up for grabs. If an AVRant listener is interested, he has it listed on eBay. So we'll have that link in the show notes, which will hopefully be still available.
Should be.
When you look for it.
Should be, at least during, well, hopefully by the time I get up the video version, if nothing else. But yes, Carl, congratulations on the purchase. And thank you for mentioning us to Accessories for Less.
Speaking of which, Philippe bought a Denon S750H from Accessories for Less and let him know it was based on our recommendations. So thank you, Philippe.
Yes, Felipe, thank you very much. Congrats on that purchase as well, and thanks for talking us up to Accessories for Less as well.
Yeah, there's got to be... We need an accent over something to make me know whether or not it's Philippe or Felipe. It just feels like there should be some sort of visual representation.
Well, we probably got it wrong either way, so there you go.
I think so. Yeah, it's probably Philip. Just as Philip with an E at the end because my mom was fancy. Don first got the 43-inch Samsung Q60T that we recommended for his RV a little ways back. The extra 0.1 of an inch was not an issue, and it looks great. He has decided against a sound bar, which is what we both recommended because his speakers are like in the most bizarre places ever.
That's right.
He picked up a lower model Denon receiver, which fit nicely thanks to being not as deep front to back. And now he has emailed Gary Yakubian at SVS and told him he knew about them from us to see if any of their speakers might work in his setup. I still feel like I don't remember how big his little openings were, but I feel like the small ones. What are they called?
The Prime satellites? That would be your best shot if you do end up going SVS. I will still suggest one of the KEF speaker bars, which is still it'll work with your new Denon receiver, but it's like 3 speakers built into one skinny bar. So yeah, I'd still go a KEF speaker bar, HTF 7003 if you want the exact model.
He's not going to buy it. So we got some notes of gratitude from some of our listeners. Carl says we make his hour-long commute a cakewalk, which, I mean...
At least twice.
It's a 2-hour-long podcast, so I just kind of feel like maybe you're either getting one time wrong or the other. Nelson, who says he's having a hard time keeping up with the podcast because he doesn't have a commute anymore during the pandemic. All the more time to sit around and listen to us.
That's right.
And Tom Gurinder, Andrew, Daniel, Aris, and Art all say thank you for keeping the podcast going. And Philippe, depending on how you want to say it, he's been catching up on episodes while the temperature outside is 116 degrees Fahrenheit or 46 degrees C in Phoenix, Arizona. I have been to Scottsdale, Arizona during a heat wave, so sir. The thing that stunned me more than anything was that the restaurant my friend worked at, this was a long, long time ago, the restaurant my friend worked at, he had coworkers that were biking to and from work.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, how do they do it? He goes, well, they bring a change of clothes. I'm like, I'd have to bring a change of skin. I mean, I don't know when I would stop sweating from 100. I think it was 112 when I was there, and it's just
I
ridiculous.
Think 116 sounds hot enough to me that I'd be past the point of sweating, and I'd just be instant heat stroke. I literally don't think I could survive that. But I will say the names again: Carl, Nelson, Tom, Gurinder, Andrew, Daniel, Aris, Art, and Felipe. Thank you very much. It was really nice. So many notes of support and gratitude this week. Super nice to see that. And thank you to everyone who continues to listen and send in questions. It's really nice to have that community going.
In the news, Sony has a new marketing message for some of their TVs ready for PlayStation 5, as are all TVs, really, but whatever. A grand total of 2 series of TVs from Sony live up to the specs, primarily being able to accept and display a 4K 120 Hz signal. Neither of them are the flagship in their respective classes. Neither of them is an OLED, and neither of them is actually ready for PlayStation 5 yet. So they're supposed to be getting firmware updates to actually do the 4K 120 hertz thing.
But they don't do it right this second as we're recording the podcast. A little ironic.
So if it's really important to you that you have that ready for PlayStation sticker that won't be on the TV unless they send you one, you can get a Sony X900H 4K LCD TV or a Z8H 8K LCD TV, or get an upper tier 2019 or 2020 LG TV or a 2020 Samsung or a 2020 Vizio P series, all of which, unlike Sony TVs, are actually ready for PlayStation 5 right now. And interesting enough, also don't have a sticker on them that says that they're ready for PlayStation 5, because
they probably have to pay to get the sticker if they want it. Wouldn't shock me.
No, I can't. I can't imagine somebody going to the store and seeing a ready for PlayStation 5 sticker on a box and saying, oh, I guess I have to upgrade my TV if I want to get this new PlayStation. I just can't. I'm sure somebody's done
Well, I mean,
that. I'm sure somebody's done
Samsung and Xbox seem pretty buddy-buddy, so it wouldn't shock me if they had some kind of sticker on there saying, like, ideal for Xbox Series X or something like that. Wouldn't shock me.
So Samsung is Korean.
They are.
And Sony is Chinese. Is that right?
It's
or
Japanese. Sony's Japanese.
Japanese. Okay. Whatever. I don't know that has anything to do with anything. I was just trying to remember.
Probably not these days.
No. I think it's just... No, I'm not even going to go there. Netflix is officially moving ahead with offering variable playback speeds on all of their streaming video content, but only on mobile Android devices for the moment. You have to manually change the playback speed of every video. It will always default back to 1 times, the normal playback, with each new video that starts playing. That was to appease content creators who complain that they don't want their work altered, but the National Association of the Deaf and the National Federation of the Blind approve of these options, as it can be helpful to be able to slow down subtitles or to speed up audio to the pace that someone is used to if they frequently use text-to-speech programs. So they have 0.5x, 0.75x, 1.25x, and 1.5x are the available options, and the pitch of the audio will automatically be corrected. Support for iOS will enter testing very soon, as well as browser support, but TV and set-top box apps won't be getting it anytime soon, if ever. We were watching Hamilton again over the weekend, and while we were taking a break for somebody to go to the bathroom or something, I scrolled up to the audio options just to see what they said. And they had, descriptive text on the, a descriptive text option. So the kids were asking me about that. I'm like, oh, that's when, when you're blind and you want to watch something, they have
when you're deaf.
Descriptive text. Deaf. Sorry. They have, no, blind. Right? Isn't it blind? Descriptive text is the audio. It's the audio.
Oh, it's the audio part.
Okay.
Tells you, yes. Sorry, I was
tells you what's happening on the screen.
Yeah.
Right. So. No, subtitles was a different category. So the descriptive text, I'm like, I have no idea how you could possibly do this during Hamilton.
Right.
So being able to slow stuff down like that actually sort of makes some sense, but I can't imagine listening to Hamilton in like slow speed. It would just be weird. But I've turned it on before accidentally, and it's very interesting to experience that and to realize what other people have to go through. I have a friend whose daughter is pretty deaf. She's not all the way deaf, but she's pretty deaf, and she has some hearing aids that work better with some frequency. She can hear my voice. Low voices are easy for her, so she likes talking to me.
Yeah.
So because she's like, I can understand you, but she reads lips like perfectly, which is killing her during the pandemic because everybody's wearing a mask.
Right.
So she went from being able to kind of pass, by reading lips to really having to struggle. So I don't know. This has nothing to do with anything.
No, well,
she's a very sweet girl, and everybody should realize that there's people out there that are having harder times than us, and we're just so busy being self-absorbed that we're not thinking about that.
I think it was valuable to have that input because, when the creators were reacting initially, and it wasn't like every creator in the world, but some were speaking out. And you know what? I understand the initial reaction of, hey, we put time into this. We're not keen on somebody watching it at 1.5 times speed. That's not the way we intended it. But I don't think they were thinking about how it could impact somebody who is hard of hearing or has vision loss. So yeah, it's an important thing to consider. I mean, YouTube's got this, so it's not like it's unusual to have this on a video streaming service. And I think it's a good move by Netflix, and I don't mind it because there are plenty of shows on there where I'm like, I don't care enough that I would just like to get through this quicker because I wouldn't mind seeing the plot at a faster pace.
Yeah. So I've been watching The Umbrella Academy. I started that with my son. I've watched the first 2 or 3 episodes. I can't remember. Boy, talk about needs to be sped up. I kind of like where it's going, but and Dark was the same way. If you've seen Dark, that's the Norwegian, I think. I'm probably Scandinavian. I don't know. Sort of Stranger Things, but with lots of sex.
Okay.
so that's a... And that's another series I was just like, dude, can we just get to the point? Like, I literally do not care about it. Nothing's happening. Can something happen, please? Anyways. All right. So, yeah. I can understand the content creators saying no to me. for just like wanting to speed up their content because I'm bored with it, but I'm interested enough that I just don't want to spend an hour getting through all
That's
of this.
right.
But not thinking about other people who actually need to slow it down or speed it up for other reasons. Makes a lot of sense. All right, got some comments from listeners here. Andrew, our spaceship model spaceship maker. Speaking of which, mine is so dusty from all the construction that's been going on. I just saw it as I was rolling. I was like, how am I going to clean it? Like, I'm afraid to break it. I don't want to break it. I don't want to like just run water over it. I mean, that seems really bad. So
maybe compressed air with a horn instead of a straw.
I don't even know. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm very distraught about this whole thing. So Andrew says, for Raul from last week, who said it wasn't easy to find a Rockwell installation where he lives, we said he could just use any type of house installation, but just be careful with the frame and backing to prevent the insulation from sagging. Andrew suggests an inexpensive way to hold soft insulation in place is to make a rectangular grid out of corner bead. Corner bead. That's the
so it went before you put or once you have put your drywall onto the framing, but before you mud and tape, you get the little metal thing that goes on the corners, the like the outside corners. Yeah, it's like the really thin piece of metal that you secure on there to harden the corners of your drywall, and then you mud and tape over that.
Okay. So, corner. He says you can use 4 vertical pieces to create stiff corners for the installation, and then cross pieces can stick into the installation like low shelves to prevent it from sagging. For Wesley, who says he has his TV on about 14 hours a day playing podcasts, Tom mentioned that there's typically a way to turn the TV screen black so that it isn't showing a static image the whole time. Andrew has noticed that most TVs include a voice assistant of some kind these days, and commanding it to turn off screen usually works. It definitely does on LG OLEDs, at least. Many TVs also have a built-in screensaver, and similarly, telling the voice assistant to start screensaver usually works. I will say that I have seen quite a few, and I'm talking about older TVs, that will have some sort of like blue screen they use for calibration and stuff like that. I imagine you could turn that on as well. That would be better than just having, static images up there the entire time, though you risk damaging whatever or overusing the blue phosphors or whatever thing.
Starting the screensaver seems like a pretty safe bet, so yeah, it's a good call. I hadn't thought of that.
Regarding labeling for overhead speakers as front heights and rear heights, even if they're physically positioned where top fronts and top rears would go, Andrew has tried it. Listen carefully. We are right. There is no issue at all with Atmos. It sounds exactly the same with speakers labeled either way, but DTS-X content is more discreet and sounds better using the height labels. So,
there we go. Some confirmation. So yeah, great. Thank you very much for those comments, Andrew. They're helpful.
Thank you. Daniel wanted to share what he has learned by doing his own display calibrations. Here we go. Daniel. Tom was right. Well, we just stop right there. I don't have to read anything else. Right.
That's how you start a comment.
I'm texting my wife. Someone said I was right, honey. See? I'm not always wrong. Shit, that's not my wife. She doesn't think I'm always wrong. Just mostly wrong. The new TVs and projectors that we recommend these days are already very close to accurate out of the box, so as long as you put them into the best picture mode, it's still possible to objectively get even closer to the industry standard targets, but the differences are very slight, and you wouldn't even notice them without a side-by-side comparison. So for most people, get a display we would recommend, put in ISF mode or movie mode or theater mode or dark mode or whatever they call it. And you can look up to see what the most accurate picture mode is named. And you're over 90% of the way there, with the last 10% barely being noticeable anyway. So that's confirmation. For someone like Daniel, it was fun, and he has 3 OLEDs from different years, plus an Epson 5050 UB, so he could justify the cost of buying Calman home software, a colorimeter, and a colorimeter, and a spectrophotometer.
Spectrophotometer.
That's what I said. To really do it right, as Rob advised. But if you just have one display and you care about the results more than the process itself, hire a professional. It will be cheaper. It's time consuming. He thinks there's a similarity to what people have told us about using RomuQ Wizard. You can end up getting consumed by chasing after perfect looking graphs, but not every display includes the ability to be adjusted to perfection, and just trying to achieve perfection is a bit pointless anyway, because we can't see as precisely as the meters can measure, which we have said before in this. He says AutoCal is cool and helpful. His B6 OLED was the only display he owns where the difference after calibration was truly appreciably better. His Epson 5050 colors were so close to perfectly accurate out of the box. The only adjustments he needed to make were basic brightness and contrast, which he could have done with a test pattern. So that's all from that same dude.
Yep. So that's very good insight. Yes, going through it yourself. Yeah, if you are interested in it and you're doing it as a, I want to know how this works and it's part of the hobby, that's awesome. But yeah, these days, there are still once in a while a TV will come out that is inaccurate out of the box and has no accurate picture mode, but it's getting rarer and rarer, and pretty much any of the displays that we would ever recommend have at least one picture mode that comes darn close. And absolutely agree that if you just have the one display, hiring a professional will be cheaper than getting all the equipment. You really need to do it right.
When we went from standard definition to 1080p, or that during that transition is when display calibration was sort of at its heyday, because they were so bad coming out. I had a Westinghouse just 1080, like from the first 1080p displays that mass market hit them, and it was not possible. The best calibrator on the planet could not get that thing accurate. You could get it close, but you couldn't get it perfect.
Well, it was actually the first time we had real universally tangible standards as well, because the joke before was never twice the same color, NTSC, back when it was standard definition. So getting Rec 709 as part of the HD standard, that was a big deal, and it really did make professional calibration hugely worthwhile at the time. But now, thankfully, and actually largely because of efforts by the Imaging Science Foundation, the ISF, things have improved, and that's a good thing for consumers.
And now that we have standards and targets, and all the manufacturers have gotten used to trying to put out displays that can at least get to those targets, we going from 1080p to 4K to soon 8K. I'm not expecting that suddenly we're going to have another resurgence of inaccurately
hopefully not
colors in displays. No, not until we get like VR or something like that. But even then, I really feel like it should be fine. All right, Eddy says we completely changed his plans regarding the 3.0 setup he had in mind for his apartment. Yeah, that'll happen on this podcast. Sorry about that. Hope we didn't make you spend any more money. His girlfriend was happy when we complimented the renders she made of his room on our YouTube channel, and coming from Reddit, he felt honored that we replied in detail to his questions. Okay, the question came from Reddit?
No, he was referred to us over on Reddit.
From Reddit. So he didn't tell us what his new plans were.
Nope.
Now I'm wondering what they are.
I'm going to go ahead and assume that he's following our advice of it's worth having a subwoofer, very much in an apartment. Have it decoupled from the floor.
And I said,
have it damped.
Don't have a center channel.
If the budget is either 3.0 or 2.1, opt for 2.1.
Yeah, these renders are still ridiculously
lifelike.
I still look at them and think that's real.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean this is what was I was watching something the other day with my son, and it was a newer movie too, and I was like, man, the special effect. Oh, that Fantastic Four, the Fantastic with that one on, and these renders are better than the special effects of Fantastic Four.
Should have hired Eddy's girlfriend to take Superman's mustache
Eddy's
off.
Girlfriend. I think that she needs her own name, and we don't need to define her by Eddy. Eddy, we need to know your girlfriend's name so that we can compliment her, personally, because she deserves the credit. Not, we think that she should do all the special effects for Fox. Is it Fox? Was it Fox? I think it was Fox.
It would have been if it was Fantastic Four. It would have been at the time.
I can't wait till Marvel does the Fantastic Four.
Yep.
I can't wait till they do it.
That is definitely going to happen.
So over at The Escapist, which is a online magazine, whatever, website, Movie Bob is one of their video guys, and he did it's worth watching. He did a video saying how could you fix the Fantastic Four?
Oh yeah.
After this was, I think, before this other movie that came out. I think it was after they basically let the other 2-3 movies die. And what he said, and it stuck with me, is the Fantastic Four are so old school. What they should, if it were me, what I would do is I would show them in the 1950s being this traditional family, whatever. They go up and then they get, part of their origin story is that they get thrown into the future. So they come back down now, and now they're now you're seeing the Fantastic Four as you remember them from the comics, but they're in today's, and I'm like, that's the way they should do it. They should totally do it. They're not going to, but that would be the way to do it. It'd be worth watching. All right, let's get some questions in here. Rob, not you, a different Rob, unless you change your last name. So we've mentioned false walls quite a few times, and Rob understands how they make sense when you want to visually hide your front speakers while having an acoustically transparent screen. But is a false wall really practical in a physical and durability sense? For example, if someone ever leaned against it or you just bumped into it somehow, it would pretty much be toast, right? So what do people do with false walls to mitigate such possibilities? They drill them into the walls and ceiling and floor so that they stay in place.
Well, I think he's talking about the fabric that is stretched over the frame.
Oh.
So if you,
okay.
I mean, yes, people do tend to like lean against walls. So if visually you're like, oh, that's a wall, you're absent-mindedly put your hand against it or lean your shoulder against it. The fabric could easily get stretched or ripped or something like that. I think that's what he's thinking of.
Right. So I mean, there is just like a normal wall would have. There is a lattice work of 2x4s and all that stuff that's holding everything together. And honestly, I mean, the solution is stay away from my wall, you maniac. What are you doing up there? Go sit down. No one told you to go up there. Go sit down. If it were me, if it were my theater, I mean, adults would not be a problem because adults would never go up there. I've never met an adult who went up to my screen or even anywhere near my speakers or anything. They always just go sit down in a chair like a human being. And for kids, I always read them the riot act before they sit down. I'm like, this is not a theater. This is not your personal playground. You're going to sit and watch this movie. If I see you throwing popcorn and making shadow puppets on my screen, you're out. So I've never had a problem. So that's what I would do.
I think there's a couple of ways. For one thing, lots of people who are building a theater that has a false wall in it, they'll build like a little stage area up at the front. So, kind of like a step at the front or a couple of steps, maybe like a rounded sort of stage up front.
And they put electrodes in there to shock anybody that steps on it?
No, but it just gives a little bit of a physical barrier so that people aren't walking right up to the screen. But I think the major way that I tend to think of it is I would probably only have the false wall area, the part that is fabric and acoustically transparent. I would pretty much only have that wide enough to contain where my speakers are. So in some cases, it might be that all three speakers are actually behind an acoustically transparent projection screen. So unless people are going up and putting their hand or leaning against your actual projection screen, which, I'd be yelling at somebody if they did that, then that wouldn't be an issue. Or if your front, left, and right speakers are just to the outsides of your screen, then you would have fabric just to the left and right. But predominantly, the fabric will be like above and below, or might not even be that because your center speaker will be behind your acoustically transparent projection screen. So to me, a lot of it is the screen is predominantly taking up that section of the wall. So nobody's going to be touching my screen, that's for sure. They're going to be buying me a new one. So to me, that's sort of the way. That and a stage.
Tim's a member of the 2 Hour Plus Club, apparently. Tim is back with his purple theater and A-frame slopes on his front and back walls. Yes, that's correct. I remember this guy.
Good.
All right, purple.
It is purple.
Front of the media room, back of the media room. Oh, wait, is there a sub up front, too?
There is no sub up front. At the moment, he has a single subwoofer behind his couch.
There's not a huge amount of space in this room, people.
There is not.
So when he first wrote us, he was asking about a display upgrade. So now he has just purchased a 77-inch LG CX OLED and a Panasonic UB820 Ultra HD Blu-ray player to go with. And naturally, he'll need a new receiver now to pass through all the 4K HDR goodness. His current receiver is a Denon 4311. He has configured it with the old DTS Neo X and Audyssey DSX11 speaker setup that includes front wides and front heights. But he's heard us mention, dude, the guy has no room in this place. Why does he have wides? But whatever. But he's heard us mention how we think 2020 is one of those years where it's a bad time to buy a brand new receiver since we expect models next year to offer HDMI 2.1 switching. So what should he do? He is able to use two HDMI cables out of his Panasonic UB820 to send the audio and video separately. And for his cable box and Roku, passing their video through his receiver is fine. But if he gets either of the new gaming consoles later this year, his Denon doesn't have eARC. So does he get a new receiver right now that has eARC? Maybe even go ahead and get a 2020 model that he could plug one of the new game systems into the receiver instead of directly into the TV, or does he wait a year? So he's worried about passing through the full bandwidth. Is what he's worried about.
So I mean, if he were to get a PlayStation 5 and or Xbox Series X, he can't plug that into his current AV receiver and get the full 4K and 120 hertz, which his brand new C10 OLED can support. So of course he's going to want that on the video side. So he could of course plug the console directly into the television, but then to get the full lossless audio, including Atmos and DTS:X and all that, although DTS:X wouldn't work on the C10 OLED since the LGs will not send back any sort of DTS signal via eARC, but he doesn't have eARC anyway on his current receiver. So he's like, either way, to get everything, the highest quality video and audio, he would need a new receiver, either one that has eARC and don't worry about HDMI 2.1 pass-through, or if he's going to get a new one anyway, maybe get one of the brand new ones. It only has a single HDMI 2.1 input, but at least it has one, so he could still pass it through that way. Or should he just wait?
Well, first of all, you don't have a problem yet.
That's right.
Right? I mean, currently right now you have no issue because the Xbox Sex, or whatever they're calling it, and the PS5, which I can't make fun of because they have a rational, normal naming system, haven't come out yet. So this is a hypothetical. By the time they actually come out and you actually get around to purchasing them, you might actually have options for new receivers. So there's that.
It seems unlikely that any other brand is going to have a different HDMI 2.1 chipset that allows for switching, but we don't know for sure. It is a possibility. Until things are official, we don't know. But I would certainly at least wait until the game consoles actually are here. There's every possibility that if you don't get your pre-order in the instant they become available, you won't even be able to get your hands on a PlayStation 5 or an Xbox Series X anyway, because we are expecting there to be shortages at the tail end here of 2020. And if you, unless you really, really want it and you're going to be like watching it like a hawk to make sure you get your pre-order in, there's a chance you won't even get one. So I would definitely not worry about your receiver upgrade until you have brand new console in hand. Now, if and when you do, there certainly are options here. I would be inclined to just wait, because I am fully expecting that next year, 2021, we will see AV receivers with HDMI 2.1 switching. So we're talking about waiting maybe 6 months with your current audio setup and living with just using an optical connection to send 5.1 audio for the time being from your games, knowing that ultimately you're saving more money versus buying right now and then also buying again in just a couple of years or something like that. That's sort of the way I feel about it, if you're willing to go along with that.
So what is he giving up? This is the real question. This is, what is he giving up? The full bandwidth, 4K 120 hertz? Is that what he's giving up? He's getting by not upgrading his receiver? Or is he giving up 4K completely?
Yeah, assuming that he would go for the highest quality video from the game console, which would mean plugging it directly into his TV. What he would be giving up would be lossless audio coming back from the TV into his current AV receiver. He'd have to use optical or regular ARC. He could use regular ARC.
What if he if he plugged everything into this current receiver, what he would have full audio.
He'd have the full audio, but he couldn't pass through the 4K 120 because
he could pass through 4K 60.
4K he should 30? He should be able to do 4K 60.
Man, I'm just not seeing that this is a humongous issue. This is not something that I'm going to spend. So when I think of a problem like this, and this I put problem in air quotes, a problem like this, I think, okay, so your solutions are, buy a receiver now and then sell it and then buy another receiver when the new ones come out.
That's right.
Which is wasteful. Then I see, okay, we'll get a switch or get some sort of splitter that you could put your HDMI into and then split out the audio.
That is the other, because you could get an HD Fury AVR key, which would separate the audio and video, so you could send the audio just to your current AV receiver, full lossless, not Atmos or DTS:X, because your current receiver doesn't do those, but full lossless audio with the full video signal. Although, no, wait. that isn't a solution for 4K 120 because the AVR key is HDMI 2.0. We don't have an HDMI 2.1 device for that yet. So, okay, we forget that. Scrap that idea of using some sort of outboard splitter.
But let's just pretend that there is a splitter that can do such a thing, and it's still going to cost, a couple $100 at least. That's just, to me, is a humongous waste for 6 months.
Yeah.
Just to get, 4K 120 instead of 4K 60.
Yeah.
I'll take the 4K 60 just fine.
Or 5.1 audio, which you could probably live. So our strong advice is wait, because it won't be that long of a wait.
I'm way too cheap. Way too cheap to spend
No, but I mean, you gotta look at. I mean, if you've got all the money in the world, money burning a hole in your pocket, then sure, by all means, go ahead and get a 2020 Denon Marantz, and if you're willing to upgrade it because you're like, hey, next year I have both the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X, and I want to be able to switch between the two, so you get a brand new receiver a year from now. If you got that kind of money, go ahead. I mean, that's no problem on our end. But assuming that he's looking for long-term value, then waiting the extra 6 months is the way to go.
So at some point, he will get an Atmos receiver. So what speaker configuration would we recommend for his room? Should he step all the way up to a model that can do 9.2.4 so they can have front heights, rear heights, and still keep his front wides? Or does he go 7.2.4 or 9.2.2? Okay, 9.2.2 is not something I would recommend.
I mean, it's what he has right now. So
yeah, if you're going to go with overheads, I would go with 4. And the way that your room, because of the A-frame, makes sense to have front heights. They're going to be in the vicinity of front heights, top fronts. You could call them whichever you want. Top, front heights is obviously what we recommend right now because of the limitations of DTS. But front height, rear heights. And if you absolutely have to have wides, well, then I guess 9.2.4, though they don't always work properly. I would just go 7.2.4 if it were me. But this is...
I mean, I think he's very likely a front wide fan, although I mentioned this the first time we saw his room. His front wides are not actually positioned exactly where front wides ought to be. One of them would basically have to be in front of his door to get the angles exactly right. So they're not exactly where they ought to be, but assuming he wants to keep them, I'm a front wide fan as well. I mean, given that you do have the option of the Denon X6700 or the 8500H, or assuming they continue with that path into 2021 and there's an X6800, or they're probably going to have a new flagship in 2021, so like an 8800, something like that. It's usually on a 3-year cycle. There could be options there, but regardless, I'm going to say, when you go Atmos stroke DTS X, you're going to want to have 4 overheads. So if you can't afford a model that can do 13 speakers, then make sure you have the front heights and the rear heights in your setup. And prioritize those over the front wides.
So only has a single subwoofer at the moment. It's a Power Sound Audio XS15. Is that extra small? I mean, it's good.
No.
Is that the 15-inch driver?
It's sealed. The S is for sealed. And it is a 15-inch driver because Power Sound Audio has nothing smaller than a 15-inch.
Yeah. So it's behind this couch on the right-hand side. If you were to get a second subwoofer, the only place you could physically place it would be behind the couch on the left-hand side. Would that work? Would it physically run? I think so. I see no reason why placing it there. I feel like these are basically co-located. They're not that... They are far up-ish apart, but they're not like super far
for
apart.
A lot of the lowest frequencies, they're acoustically speaking essentially co-located for the lowest frequencies. But no, I mean, this should still be beneficial, although I question how often do you have other people sitting to your left and right on that couch? Is it most of the time just you? And if it is most of the time just you, how is your frequency response right now with the single sub? Because if you have good frequency response right now, after equalization, at your one seat, and it's mainly just you most of the time, then you're not going to hear personally a large upgrade. The main reason to consider getting the second sub is if you want better uniformity across your seats, and it could potentially be a challenge getting that uniformity given that you only have one location where the two subs can live. It might not be possible to get excellent uniformity across your couch. You'll have a better shot at it than just having the one sub. But, maybe consider, the type of sub.
This room just doesn't seem like it justifies having two subwoofers. I mean, he's got to be crushing this room with the one that he's got.
Oh, most likely. But at the same token, maybe he has a hump or a null that he has difficulty with right now that, you can't solve if you're not able to move the single sub that you have. So it's a qualified, what I would suggest is getting a subwoofer that you can return for a full refund with free shipping both ways so that you can try it out, go through the arduous process of gradually turning the phase knob and listening to sweeps over and over and over and again until you're close to madness and probably convinced yourself that it's worth it just to, justify having gone through it. But yeah, I would say a qualified yes to give it a try.
Yeah.
I will say, if you have good frequency response now and it's mainly just you, then leave well enough alone.
Yeah, I would. I mean, it's a 3-seater couch. And, I mean, a 15-inch sub basically takes up most of one seat.
Yeah.
I just don't. I don't know that there's going to be a humongous change in the uniformity across this couch with adding that second sub, but I could be wrong. If you want to give it a try, of course, do. Mm-hmm. If you're asking me if I think it's going to make a massive difference in your room, I think it might make a difference. I don't know that it would be good or bad. It may just be different, and therefore, pretty unpredictable. I have to scroll. Okay, he looked up the suggested picture settings for a CX OLED over at Ertings. Ertings.
Artings. They want to say ratings, but they took out the A. It's their fault.
They capitalized both the R and the T,
they did.
So they got this coming. They actually seem a bit sparse. Are there more detailed settings that you ought to look up somewhere? I'm guessing no. I'm guessing that's fine. I guess out of the box it looks pretty good.
Yes.
Don't have to worry about it.
There are at least 3 picture modes in the C10 OLED, all of which are really, really close straight out of the box. The most accurate is filmmaker mode. Essentially, you put it in filmmaker mode and you're done if you're in a dark room. If you are in a situation where you have ambient light, it's as simple as still being in filmmaker mode but raising the OLED light setting. There honestly isn't anything else to do. So the settings that they've put there, they're like, there's nothing to adjust. You leave everything at default.
Right.
I mean, they use the cinema mode, also accurate. You could also use the ISF dark mode, also accurate. They're basically all identical. They by default, they have slightly different OLED light settings, and that's really all it is. So, choose one of those picture modes, and you're basically done. When it kicks into HDR mode, make sure it's the cinema dark HDR mode, and that's it. You're accurate. So, you have nothing to worry about, essentially.
So the LG's menu system is pretty confusing, and the manual isn't much help. Is there an easily viewable menu tree that he could look at on his tablet? Again, I feel like if all you have to do is put in one picture mode and walk away, how complicated does it have to be? I mean, how much information do you need for this?
But fair, there are other things in like the general tab that aren't to do with picture mode settings and that. So unfortunately, I haven't come across something like this, which is just a nicely viewable menu tree that you can see all at once. There are some videos online, particularly from Vincent Tio at HDTV Test on YouTube, where he walks through pretty much the entire menu, but that is watching like a half-hour-long video just to go through a menu, which frankly you could do yourself by just going through each option and keeping track of going in and backing out of each submenu. But he gives a little explanation of what each setting does, so that might be very helpful. That's about the best I've got for you because I don't know of just a nice handy menu tree. Sorry.
Will. This came from Facebook, which is not a guaranteed way of getting your question on this podcast, but apparently will slip through somehow. We have often mentioned how Dolby says to install in-ceiling speakers with them firing straight down. We've also mentioned their guidelines on how far apart they should be placed in terms of width. Can we share the documentation where they give this recommendations? Okay, first of all, this is a living document, meaning they change stuff all the time and pretend that they didn't. So it's on the Dolby website. I'm sure we'll have a link to it on our website and in our show notes.
Yes, we will.
But it is do not think that just because you read it once that it's never going to change again.
That's true.
They totally started saying that they have always recommended surround speakers be at ear height, and they have never recommended that before Atmos. So
The current
take it all with a grain of
guidelines
salt.
on widths of the overhead speakers changed from the initial. But if you want to just look it up, we will, like Tom mentioned, have the link for it at avrant.com and in the show notes on YouTube for this episode. But if you just want to Google it, it is the Dolby Atmos Home Theater Installation Guidelines, and it'll actually come up as a PDF. It's a white paper. But yes, you will find their description of having things... Sorry, I had a little glitch here. But yeah, you will find the description on page 7, where they talk about having the overhead speakers firing straight down. That is where they will mention that if you have speakers, in-ceiling speakers with narrow dispersion, that it is absolutely fine to aim them towards the seats, but that... typically they're looking for wide dispersion in ceiling speakers, which is most of your concentric in ceiling speakers that you'll find have that wide dispersion, that they should be firing straight down. And then, the widths are described there as being between 0.5 and 0.7 of your room's total width, or actually they describe it as your setup's total width. So however wide apart your surround speakers are, strictly going by their guidelines, multiply the width of your surround speaker distance by 0.5 to 0.7, and the distance should be something like that. But yeah, page 7 of the installation guidelines for home theater.
Fred had lightning strike near his house. His wife was in the theater at the time, and she heard a puff. I don't know how to say this. Puff.
Like a puff.
The sound of something dying. And it came from the AV closet. Fred immediately worried that all was lost, but it wasn't quite that bad. His Wi-Fi router was kaput, but his cable modem was still okay. He has a Panasonic Plasma and an Epson 8350 projector. Thankfully, both of these are fine, and all of his HDMI inputs are still working. He was using 2 active HDMI cables. Both of those are dead. His 15-foot passive HDMI cable is fine, though. The worst damage is his Denon X4300H receiver. All of the audio sections still seems to work fine, and the HDMI inputs seem to work, but all of the HDMI outputs are non-functional. A factory reset did not fix it. His plasma, his AV receiver, and his 2 SVS SB2000 subwoofers were all plugged in directly into wall outlets. Everything else, the projector, the Shield TV, Blu-ray player, and various hubs were plugged into an APC back UPS 550 unit. Any other troubleshooting he should or could attempt on his Denon. So if you already know that the outputs are not functional, but the inputs seem to work, and you factory reset it, I think you did all the stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know what else you
Also,
could do.
if your active HDMI cables are kaput, that's a pretty strong sign that, unfortunately, the HDMI outputs of your Denon are very likely just fried.
So he bought the Denon from Accessories for Less. It's definitely past the 1-year warranty period. Should he contact Accessories for Less, Denon directly, or a third-party repair shop to inquire about an HDMI repair? You should just contact Accessories for Less for buying a new receiver, because the repair is going to cost more than the new receiver is.
I don't know about that, because...
I think so. I definitely think so.
I don't in this case. Get an X4300H, that's not a super cheap model, and we're talking about an HDMI board replacement, because that's really what this is. Everything else is functioning. He's not replacing anything besides the HDMI board, and those are, relatively speaking, typically quite easy to replace in AV receivers. It's a separate board from the rest of the thing that can be sort of a new part swapped in. So I would contact Denon directly, and I would contact Accessories for Less, who will probably just forward you to Denon. But it doesn't hurt to email them and just inquire. But definitely contact Denon directly, because if nothing else, they have their sort of national repair center where you would have to ship it in, if that's the place they tell you to send it. But they do have authorized repair places around the country. I would definitely get in touch with Denon directly and go ahead and email Accessories for Less, because they might be able to help you out.
So yeah, his AV receiver is plugged directly into a wall outlet, and that's
it was, yeah.
Probably should have, yeah. I was going to say, if you had to plug it into that APC backup, you might have had an option of calling them, but I don't see that they're going to be able to help you here. I mean, do what Rob said. Just figure out how much the cost is going to be. A lot of places that do these kind of repairs, they won't give you an estimate over the phone,
Right.
or at all. What they'll want to do is see it, and it's going to be a minimum of like $50 for them to give you the estimate.
That's right.
And then if you decide to go through with the repair, they apply that $50 or $100 or whatever it is to the price of the repair. They are going to look for more than just they're going to have to test the whole thing, because they can't just take your word for it that the HDMI is the only problem. Because if they replace the HDMI board and they send it back to you saying now something else is broken, and you guys did it when you were in there and they didn't test it beforehand, they won't be able to argue with you about it. So yes, maybe the swapping out of the HDMI board is not that big of a deal, or maybe that expensive, but they are going to want to have to check everything else just to protect themselves. So we'll see how much it costs. He says if the repair is going to cost almost as much as a replacement receiver, should he look into getting an older model, since neither of his displays is 4K or HDR, and he isn't planning to the display upgrade anytime soon. He does want to keep a 5.2.4 configuration, so any particular receiver models to consider. Well, I mean, I guess the 3000 series on up does that out of the box.
Yeah, the newer 3000, so the X3600 or X3700, or going back a ways, any of the 4000 series would be able to do what you want to do here. But I mean, we're not seeing model years go way back at this time.
Right. No.
You're not going back multiple years now. So at most, you might find like a 4400 is probably about the oldest you would find at this point. So if you're going to stick with 5.2.4, then it's going to be that. It's going to be an X3600 or an X44 or probably 4500 at this point. That's almost certainly going to be either of those models. And that'd be fine. There's no downside to that in your setup at all.
Yeah. So his house was built in 1970, but it was rewired not that long ago to be fully up to code. He has an over-the-air antenna, but it's in his loft space, not outside on the roof. He has a cable feed coming into his house and a regular electrical service. So what should he do in the way of power protection in case there's ever another lightning strike? Would a whole house surge protector on his electrical panel be a good idea? Would it have helped and been okay to have his AV receiver plugged into one of the surge-only outlets on his APC back UPS, whatever it's called? He wasn't sure if having all of the devices in his AV closet plugged into a single outlet via the APC would be too much of a current draw, so that's why he had the receiver plugged directly into his wall. Should he have a roof-mounted lightning rod installed? The lightning rod, my understanding of lightning rods is they don't really help you all that much, so I don't know that that's going to do much. You should have had your receiver plugged into the APC.
Well, I'm gonna, because this is a back UPS unit, it's not one of the AV centric units from APC. This is like the type that's meant to protect like a small computer system. So those are limited to 12 amps even on the surge only outlets. They are limited to 12 amps. It's probably not a problem, but it's one of those things where if you did have an issue, APC would probably make the case we're not going to cover you under their coverage because you've plugged in a device that could draw the full 15 amps, and the back UPS is not a unit that's rated for that. So it could be worth getting a J-type.
Yeah, get a J-type or an H-type if you don't want the battery, but I think you want the battery.
I think he wants the battery. So like a J25 is relatively affordable. It has 2 high current outlets that are rated for the full 15 amps that you could plug your AV receiver into. I do think that's a good idea. That all said, it isn't necessarily the case that the surge came in through the wall outlet into your AV receiver and went that direction. Your television was also plugged into the wall. Also, you said you have a cable feed. We don't know if it potentially came in through there. Like he did, I think he mentioned in his email that like a Wi-Fi router actually died, right?
Yes, right.
So it seems...
That's likely where it came in.
Yeah.
I think it came in through the cable into the modem, the modem through the whole system.
Yeah.
So on the back of your APC, your new APC J-type, if that's what you get, there will be a cable inlet.
That's right.
A cable outlet.
Coaxial connections.
Use that. Now, it shouldn't attenuate the signal that much.
3 decibels.
It can be enough. In my experience, it can be enough to lose you some channels. That has happened to me before. It's been years since that happened, and I may have had a signal that was just right there on the border. and I was able to get a lot of those channels back by getting having the calling cable company, and they had like all these splitters all over the house to get it to different rooms. I'm like, I don't care about these other rooms. I just want it to come here. Yeah. Like, okay, when they took out a lot of those junction boxes, which each one of those was attenuating.
That's right.
2 or 3 dB.
Yeah.
So you may plug it in and it's no problem, or you may not. But anything that's going into your theater, if it's not plugged into one of these surge protectors in some way, it's like water. It only needs one way to get in, and it will find that way.
And it seems as though like only the most sensitive parts of your equipment are what fried. So it wasn't like a full. If this was a full fat lightning strike that made it through your whole house, you would have had a lot more than just a couple of active HDMI cables and 2 HDMI outputs fried. It means that it was a pretty small surge that got in there. It was just enough for those very sensitive pieces of equipment to take an overvoltage enough to kill those particular pieces. But unfortunately with power protection, it kind of has to be an all or nothing. Like, I'm certainly not against having whole house surge protection at your electrical panel, but that is not necessarily going to protect your devices, because if they're connected to your cable, and that's where the surge came through, then having your electrical panel protected isn't going to stop that. So it has to be all parts, all wires, everywhere that a surge could come in. All of it has to be protected. I don't think you need a lightning rod. It doesn't sound like you're in a location where you're getting lightning all the time. This is a rare occurrence that happened to get you, but I don't think that's the way to go here. I'm certainly not against whole house surge protection, but I don't think that you necessarily really, really, really need it, because again, it's not a solution that guarantees you're protecting everything. It's mostly about having everything routed through that APC, including your cable connection.
Well, and the reason why we say that it's okay to plug subwoofers directly into the wall is oftentimes people are just using regular surge protectors, and they limit the voltage, and the subwoofer will draw more, it will draw the full amount sometimes.
And they have fuses.
And second, they have fuses. So they should be protected. They should, that fuse should break before the surge gets to anything else. But your AV receiver, your modem, your TV, they don't have that protection. So that's why we need you to plug all those things into protection. All right, Tap. First up, Tap says that all the help we've provided him over the past couple of years has led him to helping a couple of friends with their setup. So he's had a taste of what it's like to be on the A side of the Q&A, and it's a slippery slope. But he has some questions for us. I bet he has some friends who have some questions for us. There you go. A couple of years back, Best Buy had a sale on some Sonos outdoor speakers and the now discontinued Sonos Connect amp. He used them to provide sound for the Samsung TV out on his covered patio. Unfortunately, the Sonos Connect amp only has analog RCA inputs, and he has he only has an optical connection coming out of his Samsung TV. So he ran that optical connection to the Yamaha receiver in his family room, then used the Zone 2 pre-outs to feed the Sonos Connect amp. It's even a bit more complicated than that, since he was already using all the available optical inputs in his Yamaha, but an optical to coax converter took care of that. So even though the connection path is convoluted, it all functions perfectly fine. But now he would like to add a second pair of speakers outside, and he would like to have the option for them to play the same thing as the outdoor TV speakers or a different source. So do we think he should buy another Sonos amp? There might be issues there because the current version of the Sonos amp uses the new Sonos S2 platform, and the Connect amp that he owns is the ZP120, so they wouldn't work together, correct? Should you get another Zone 2 receiver? What's the best solution? I cannot tell you that I understand what the heck he's talking about.
Right, so Sonos basically has a second generation, like their software platform. They've updated that, and not all of their previous products work on the new S2 software platform. He has what they were referring to as the Generation 1 Sonos Connect amp, and it will not work on the new S2 platform, whereas if you were to buy a Sonos amp today, it would be on the S2 platform. So that is not really a solution. Also, I don't think it's the way to go here to do all the things you want to do. Now, I mean, my first thought when he said this was he's on Yamaha. That was on our advice because Yamaha has MusicCast, and he wanted a whole house system that could work, that he could control himself. So we said MusicCast is a great way to do that. So all of his AV receivers throughout his house are Yamaha and on the MusicCast system. And Yamaha offers a MusicCast amp, which is very similar to the Sonos amp. It's a small little Class D stereo device that works on the MusicCast platform. Same idea, wireless whole house. But it's $500. And for well less than $500, you could get a new AV receiver, which would allow you to do everything that you want to do. Now, to me, there's not really a strong reason why you'd have to get a new AV receiver that does Zone 2. Because to do that, you actually have to go up in Yamaha's lineup to the RXV. It's the 685 right now, would sort of be the least expensive one that actually has a Zone 2. The models below that, like the 585 and the 485, they have a Zone B, not a Zone 2. And the distinction there is that Zone B can only ever play the same thing as the main zone. You have the option of turning it on or off. You have the option of having only Zone B and not the main zone. But if you have both the main zone and Zone B turned on, they will always play the same thing. And he's saying he wants to play different things. So for a true Zone 2, you'd have to go to the RXV 685. Now, you can get that for $450 over at Accessories for Less, which is less than the little dinky 2-channel Class D MusicCast amp, so it's still the better deal even if you do that. But he said the setup he has right now is already working. And he can send whatever he's listening to in the family room and Zone 2, which is presently going through his Sonos Connect amp, he can send that via MusicCast to another Yamaha receiver, like a really cheap one, like the 485. Which you can get for $300. So you could just do that. You could keep exactly what you have, but just add an RXV 485 receiver to power your second set, or use that to power your, the outdoor television speakers if you want to. But that could work, or spend a little bit more, $150 more, get the 685, and now you can power both pairs of your outdoor speakers from one AV receiver and do Zone 2, so playing the same source or different sources. I would come at it that way. I think that makes the most sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
None of that made any sense to me, so let's just go on. So he likes the Sonos outdoor speakers, but he isn't crazy about their normal $550 price per pair. He could wait and hope they go on sale again to get another pair, but if he were to buy something else right now, what would we recommend? He already bought and returned a pair of Klipsch outdoor speakers, not because of their sound, but because of their looks. He wants speakers that are pure white finish, and the Klipsch are off-white, what we can say. This is outdoor, right?
This is outdoor.
We always recommend Yamaha outdoor speakers.
And he's already got lots of other Yamaha.
I know, yeah, really. If we're going to stay brand specific here, consistent here. My parents I recommended the Yamaha outdoor speakers for them many, many moons ago. I think I got the 6.5.
Yes, I would at least get the 6.5, the 5 1/4.
They were plenty loud.
Oh, yeah.
Plenty, yeah, and they're, they're weatherproof, so I would recommend them.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I've got zero qualms recommending Yamaha's outdoor speakers. Now, over at Best Buy, they have the AW390s. Now, they're on sale right now, $130 a pair, so I don't think that price is going to be any sort of a problem. We will vouch for the sound quality there. I will just say it might be worth just going to Best Buy to see the finish in person, because you'll be able to see the finish that way, even if it involves buying them and returning them if they don't have a demo pair for you to see. But just to make sure the white finish on those is sufficiently pure white for you and not an off-white color. If you want some Yamaha outdoor speakers that can play even a little bit louder and I think are a little bit nicer. I prefer the sort of wedge-shaped ones, the AW592s. Yeah. Those are available over at Amazon for $250 a pair, so still well less expensive than the Sonance ones. So I like the AW592s, the wedge-shaped Yamahas, but they cost a bit more, and there's nothing wrong with the AW390s. I will mention A pair of outdoor speakers that I know for sure are a very pure white finish are Kef's. They have their Ventura 6 outdoor speakers from Kef, but they're $500 a pair, so not really much cheaper than the Sonance.
Right.
I just know that they are a very pure white finish, but I'll bet if you were going to pay that much, you just go and get the Sonance ones that you already know that you like. So probably the Yamahas, but yeah, you can just pop down to Best Buy, make sure their white finish is
the color that
sufficiently
you
white.
want, right? Yeah, the Yamis are. I mean, I remember them being pretty Snow White. I mean,
Yeah, they didn't strike me
honestly,
as off-white or beige or anything.
No, and plus, once they get outside for any length of time, they're going to turn whatever color they're going to turn.
A little bit.
So. All right, Tom, not me, different Tom. This Tom says, since me, Tom, declared that Rob is actually just a manifestation from with my mind. After all, we've never physically been in the same room at the same time. Does that mean that Tom is actually a big fan of 3D and front wides, but he's just afraid to admit it to himself?
Plot twist.
Bite your tongue. Just close your filthy mouth, Tom, if that's your real name. Who asked for your opinion? It's not. I didn't even want to entertain this thought.
And I, Rob, speaking from within Tom's head, will say, well, I mean, subconsciously, he must be. It's the only explanation.
It also means that within me, there's a really nice person who lives in Canada, who somehow escaped the dumpster fire that is the United States at this current time. So,
man.
you can look at it. You can look at it however you want. Tom.
My prevailing theory is that we are in actual fact two separate people with mostly agreeing and concurrent opinions on a lot of home theater stuff, but occasionally some differences, such as being fan of front wide speakers in 3D. So that's my prevailing theory, but it's very difficult to prove. It's very difficult to prove human existence and consciousness, and it's one or the other.
Since neither one of us is going to get on a plane anytime soon,
No.
it's going to take quite some time before we prove anything. So. Yeah, so what's going on with Tom here? He's heard us lament that outside of Trinov, we don't have the technology to essentially place speakers anywhere, then have the AV receiver adapt the EQ levels and steering of sounds to make that arbitrary speaker placement work. But is that really true? With object-based audio like Atmos and DTS:X, shouldn't it be relatively easy in theory? Why can't we have an on-screen diagram that would let us click on the locations of the speakers relative to some fixed points, perhaps a primary listening position, and then automatically adjust everything from there? Furthermore, haven't games been doing something along these lines for years since the direction of sounds changed depending on which way your character is facing? What is he missing that is preventing all of this in today's receivers? Processing power. I think is, them not wanting to put in, them wanting to give the exact amount of processing power necessary to do the thing and to keep it as cheap as possible. Can they do all of this stuff? Yes, it requires a computer. That's what Trinov is.
Trinov shows that it can be done. The way that Trinov gets the 3D speaker location data is by having a tetrahedral microphone. So it's like a triangle of microphones on one level plane, and then another microphone that sits above them, so it can triangulate azimuth and elevation angle of all the speakers in your room. It's a very painstaking and difficult process, which is why Trinov pretty much has to be professionally installed, at least that part of it. Getting those measurements correct and actually getting that 3D location data is not a trivial thing that I would advise a first-time user to do on their own. You can very easily screw that up. But yeah, the idea of just plugging in via some kind of on-screen diagram or like an app or something like that, just pointing to where your speakers are. I mean, that sounds a little imprecise to begin with, but then on top of that, the way that the sound is mixed is not all objects. We might get there one day when sounds are mixed into just objects and nothing else, but at present, even within Atmos and DTS:X soundtracks, most of the sound is still mixed into fixed channels, where those channels assume fixed speaker locations. Now, something like Trinov can say, well, we know where all the fixed sounds are meant to be, whether they are channels or objects, and we can still remap it to the actual location of your speakers because they're able to triangulate that. So even with the distinction between channels and objects, theoretically, it could be done. But yeah, I think there's there's sort of a lot more to it. Like when it comes to how the games are doing it, they too are assuming fixed speaker positions. So
usually on your ears.
Yeah, I mean the your character turns and the sound moves from what used to be in front of you to somewhere behind you because your character rotated. That is still being done in a channel-based process. That's not even being done in an object-based process. It's just being panned within a real-time mixer situation because it's assuming that your speakers are positioned in those fixed positions. So yeah, it's almost as though we would need a little bit of a change on the recording side. Not necessarily. Trinov proves that you don't absolutely have to, but to make this the most efficient, you would want everything to be encoded as objects. And then, having a method of precise speaker location, 3D data for the speakers, that's probably easier said than done. And then, as Tom said right at the beginning, you need the processing power built into the AV receiver to then make use of all that, which is no trivial thing.
That's a cost. That's just a cost-cutting thing. I mean, they're trying to keep prices down, and you want to, I mean, obviously, if you wanted it bad enough, you'd buy a Trinov, which can do it, right? And nobody, not nobody, but fewer people than, it's not exactly a mass market product to begin with. So getting, trying to shoehorn that kind of technology into an AV receiver, the closest thing we have is the Yamaha, a Y-POW with RSC, whatever, where they have the little weird Nerf.
Yeah,
Frisbee.
I mean, it also does like a
boomerang
tetrahedral measurement. It gets you to physically move one microphone around on a little like template disc, essentially, is what it's doing. But a similar thing. So it takes even longer than the Trinov to that initial measurement because you're moving the microphone 3 times.
Right. So, will we get there? I think we will. I don't know if it'll happen in time for us to still have home theaters.
Well, I mean, the other side of it is what we're seeing the industry going toward at this time. It might change, but at this time where things are headed is toward more psychoacoustic processing to give you a better sense of 3-dimensional movement either through headphones or just a stereo pair of speakers. I mean, that's what Sony's doing with the PlayStation 5. They have their own object audio-based system, but it's really meant to work with just a pair of speakers or particularly with headphones. So I definitely think in the near term, that's where things will go first, is giving you like more like head tracking and 3-dimensional sound from a pair of headphones or from just a pair of speakers through psychoacoustic means. That is definitely coming first before we get to this type of level of processing.
Yeah. Nelson's Marantz SR7010 receiver is malfunctioning. It immediately goes into protection mode whenever he tries to power it up, and that is with absolutely nothing but the power cord plugged in, since he tried to do some troubleshooting. He already has a 7.2.4 configuration in his 15 by 18 foot theater, and he plans to upgrade to a JVC NX5 or an X7 projector soon. He also has a 5-channel B and K amp on hand. So should he seek out a repair, or is this a good excuse to get a newer receiver model? If he gets a new receiver, he'd buy it from accessories for less, so it wouldn't be one of the brand new 2020 models. He's thinking either a Denon X4500H or a Marantz SR7013. Any valid reason other than just preferring the looks to pay more for the Marantz in that case. So I know you said you did some troubleshooting. So is at this point that I'm like, get your vacuum cleaner out, and like vacuum off the back of that receiver. You may even want to. At this point, you've got nothing to lose. Take the top off of it and vacuum out the inside of it.
I bet you have maybe a little spider web in there, and I'm not talking some gigantic thing, but it's very there are very little spiders that can still stream their little spider silk out, and that one little strand of spider silk on the inside of the binding post terminals, not even the outside where you might see it, probably not if it's a single strand of spider web, but it could be on the inside as well. It's highly likely that that's all it is.
You have a short someplace.
Yeah.
It's a short someplace, and if it's physical on the outside or even on the outside of the inside of the receiver, just vacuuming or compressed air or whatever can solve this problem for you. It's at least worth trying.
Definitely.
Then as far as the Denon versus Marantz, if you do end up wanting to upgrade or whatever we're calling this, it's not really that much of an upgrade. I don't think there's really, the Marantzes haven't really shown much reason other than looks and or 7 point whatever analog inputs to really
That's right.
do much upgrading. Do you have a? And if you told me I just want a Marantz because I like the way Marantz is look, I am with you and I agree and I support you. Go with God, but there's no, I don't think, objective reason to choose Marantz over Denon if you're not plugging in like super duper legacy gear.
Yeah, no, features and performance wise, I can't tell you that there's a good reason to spend several $100s more if it was a choice between the 4500H from Denon and the 7013 from Marantz. Price to performance wise, I would have to tell you to get the X4500H. But yeah, if the price is close enough and you just like the looks, absolutely choose the Marantz for that reason. But yeah, you might pay a little bit more. But I would absolutely, at least again, email Sound United and just inquire about what a repair, or to have the estimate looked at, whatever it is. I would at least inquire about it because that doesn't cost you anything besides a little bit of time to send the email. But I suspect that a thorough cleaning outside and in, popping the top cover off, I'm betting that's what it is.
Yeah, it's all it sounds like. It sounds like a short. It just sounds like something's laying across the speaker binding post. Andrew, the guy who made the spaceship models for our giveaways. Andrew and Rob sorted through some of his issues with using his Harmony Elite remote to send multiple commands with one button press. Where Andrew was running into trouble was with his NVIDIA Shield, which he wants to remain on at all times. Furthermore, an annoying menu would pop up on the screen sometimes, and sometimes he would start the Harmony activity to watch a different source, only to have the input switch itself to the NVIDIA Shield all on its own because of gremlins. So perhaps we can use his examples as an opportunity to share some of our methods and best practices for getting a Harmony remote system to control things the way we want to. In particular, can we talk a bit about delays and how best to handle and make use of those? I have to clear my throat, sorry.
Sure. So I will just start by saying, yes, HDMI CEC was involved in this thing. Andrew discovered that he swears that he had turned off HDMI control in his Denon receiver, but somehow at some point when he was messing around with settings, HDMI control got turned back on. That was largely responsible for the NVIDIA Shield basically switching itself, the input of the Denon switching over to the NVIDIA Shield because he was keeping that on at all times. The NVIDIA Shield also has CEC commands going there, so when that command came in and HDMI control was turned on inside of his Denon, it was automatically switching the input over to that, which he didn't want it to do. So turning HDMI control off in his Denon solved that issue. On top of that, the annoying menu that was popping up is called Denon's HDMI Smart Menu, which only activates if HDMI control is turned on. It becomes grayed off and unavailable if you turn HDMI control off inside the Denon. So that killed those two sides of things. And yes, that is probably tip number one that both Tom and I will agree on, is if you have a Harmony remote and you are programming your own activities so that with the press of a single button, multiple devices turn on and switch to the correct inputs, we absolutely want to have HDMI CEC turned off in every single device in your system if you can. We are not fans of CEC pretty much full stop, but especially with a Harmony, we don't want it active because then it just overrides the Harmony commands that were sent at inopportune times. So that's the first and easy tip there. Turn off CEC.
Right. So what do we use delays for? Most of the time, we don't have to. Most of the time, the Harmony will do that for you when you program it.
Yeah, it has some defaults already in there for each device that you say that you have.
Yeah. It will know that certain devices need a certain amount of time before after powering on the receiver. If you're going to switch an input, there will be a delay built in. Now, whatever that delay is, however many milliseconds or whatever it is, or how many seconds it is determined by Harmony. But you may decide that for whatever reason your delay is hit or miss.
Sure.
So the receiver comes on and then you're on the wrong input and you have to press help and it says, does this fix it? And it fixes it. And all that is that it's trying to switch inputs
again
to it's trying to switch inputs, but the receiver hasn't fully powered on yet.
Sure.
And that's why it's not able to switch those inputs. So you may, sometimes you'll have access to going in there and extending that delay, but a lot of times what we'll do is we'll just have you add the switching again later on, manually into the macro, basically. This is a bunch of different button keys and stuff like that it's pressing for you.
Right.
So you can do it, depending on how Harmony has it set up. Sometimes you have access to the full, because I haven't done this in a really long time. The full sequence that it's doing, and sometimes it's the activity does itself, and then you can add stuff onto the end of it. In which case, you can just add it again to switch the input to the correct input, whatever that button is. For each one of your activities.
So Tom has said some words that I want to make sure we make really clear, because the nomenclature that Harmony uses for their remotes is not the same as the old universal remotes that we were used to.
Right.
And it's important to have those. And it actually, a little bit of just misunderstanding, miscommunication about the words that they use was responsible for some of the issues that Andrew was having when he and I were talking via Twitter. So the way that Harmony comes at things is, first of all, one of the tips I have is it's important. It's easy to overlook, because if you just follow the sort of setup wizard, Harmony says, okay, tell me what devices you have. That much makes sense. And then it immediately says, hey, do you want us to make some default activities so that you press one button and a whole bunch of things turn on and go to the correct inputs? And most people say yes. Or even if they set it up manually, they start immediately jumping into activities. And my biggest tip to you is spend some time with each individual device and getting each individual device configured the way that you want that one device to work with the remote. So there is the specification of devices within the Harmony, which is pretty self-explanatory. It's one device at a time. But that was actually where Andrew was able to solve his issue of his NVIDIA Shield turning on and off, depending on which activity he was activating. So just to define an activity for people who might not be familiar, an activity is something like a watch TV activity versus a watch my Blu-ray player activity versus a play my PlayStation 4 activity. It's the idea of this is not just one device involved. These are multiple devices involved, so we're going to call it an activity instead of just a device. So a single thing versus multiple things that are all working together to do a particular activity. So in the devices section is where you can specify how the power commands work with that one device. And you are able to say, have a discrete on command and have a discrete off command for most devices. Not all, but majority have that. Even if the original remote that came with your device only has a power toggle, a lot of times Harmony has in their database discrete on and off commands. That's one way to come at it. Another is to say, like in the case of my cable box, I never want it to power down. Even if I put it in standby, it draws the same amount of electricity anyway, so I just want it to stay on all the time. Well, you can specify that in the device, and that was actually exactly what Andrew needed. He had spent time trying to program his activities. It's like, I'm trying to put in these like extra commands at the end of the activity to like turn the shield back on if it turned off, and he's like trying to wrap his hand around. I'm like, oh, you can just tell it to never turn the shield off. But that's in the device section, not in the activity section. So it's important to know the distinction there. Then there's another thing that Harmony calls sequences. Now, when you set up an activity like watch TV, okay, watch TV is going to turn on your television, of course, your AV receiver if you have one, and your cable box. Or maybe you've set your cable box to never turn on or off, but that was done in the devices. But it's going to send commands to all three of those devices as part of your activity. Once that activity has started, if you then want to be able to send multiple button presses, but with a single physical button push, we used to call that a macro on most universal remotes. But Harmony refers to it as a sequence. And what's important to know, and what gets frustrating, is that you can only program a sequence, a macro, inside of an activity. You can't create a sequence for one device and then use that sequence across all of your different activities. If you want a sequence, a macro to exist in multiple activities, unfortunately, you have to manually program that sequence in each activity individually. There's no way to save a sequence as a thing unto itself that you can use in multiple places. That's one of the sort of downsides of the way that the Harmony software works. But if you're aware of it, at least you can sort of prepare yourself for that. You're like, I want to make macros. Where's like the macro setup button inside of the software? Unfortunately, it's only one activity at a time. So that's sort of the nomenclature there to think of devices, activities, and sequences within activities. The other tip that I have is basically just to spend time browsing, not even programming. You'll end up discovering a lot of features such as like discrete IR commands that are only sent out of the remote itself and not the hub, or it's sent out of only the largest part of the hub's blaster and not the two little extension ports on the back, or only sent out of one of the little extension ports on the back and nothing else. You'll discover all of those kind of settings by basically just browsing around. And the final tip that I have is there are 3 places to browse around now. Unfortunately, I don't really like that they've done that. They've tried to make it convenient, but they've ended up making it so that you can easily get confused, because you can make changes on the remote itself. If you have like a Harmony Elite, you can make changes in the app that runs on your smartphone or your tablet, and you can make changes in the desktop software, or if it's running on your laptop. And there are a handful of things that are like only done in one place but not the others, or 2 out of the 3 but not all 3. So literally just browsing around is a really good tip, because you will discover some settings that you're like, I didn't know this thing could do that.
So in the back of the Harmony Hub that came with the Elite remote, there are 2 2.5mm jacks. Clearly, the 2 smaller IR blasters that came in the box can't be plugged into those, but his receiver has a 3.5mm IR input port, so could he use the 2.5 to 3.5mm cable to directly control his receiver from the hub using those ports? He couldn't find any written documentation about that. That is not how that works. So,
well, it can. It can.
Can it?
Yes. As I mentioned, you can have a command sent out of only one of the ports at the back.
Right.
And
but you can plug that directly into the receiver and not into a blaster that you put on the front of the receiver?
You can, because it is just sending a standard IR command out of that little port at the back. So it would have to be a mono. Don't use a stereo cable. It would have to be a mono 2.5mm to mono 3.5mm cable or adapter. But you could set it up so that command is sent only out of the port on the back of the Harmony Hub, and then it would only go to the AV receiver with its 3.5mm IR input jack, because it is just standard IR commands.
Would work. I did not know that would work. I assumed that needed to be like not Harmony.
Nope.
Needed to be like some sort of custom installer thing.
It's standard IR commands. They do also have an accessory that you can get directly from Logitech, which are their precision IR cables. So what comes in the box with the hub are a couple of little extender blasters, but as the name suggests, they are blasters. It's widespread IR that goes all over the place. If you want to just control one device by sticking a little IR transmitter directly to the little IR receiving eye of your device, they do have precision IR cables that can plug into those little ports on the back of the hub, and you can buy those directly from Logitech.
So Andrew has talked to Rob several times via Twitter, and it has seemed as though Rob has often responded quickly with knowledge about a wide variety of topics, or products, I'm sorry. And Tom has mentioned several times on the podcast that he is reading the questions for the first time live on air, and yet he also responds with a great depth of knowledge right off the top of his head. So what's our method for learning and remembering all this stuff, including for products we don't even own ourselves? And furthermore, how have we maintained our passion and interest for home theater over so many years of doing the podcast? Andrew has found that his interests ebbs and flows depending on whether he's in the market to buy something or not, but it seems like our level of interest has remained very consistent. So, yeah, Rob has a more encyclopedic knowledge things than I do. There's no doubt about that. I just have a lot of experience.
Huh?
I mean, basically, I'm pulling on a vast store of products I've reviewed and things I've physically touched, handled, and times I've gone to trade shows and other things where I have learned things. So that's where I'm pulling from. And Rob does a lot of research. I mean, he does a lot of work on this. This is not something he's just pulling off the top of the dome piece. And the fact that you think that great depth of knowledge, it seems a little generous there. But yes, I am reading these podcasts I'm reading these questions for the first time. I often haven't opened the document that Rob has put together until the day of. I have sometimes done some research beforehand, and you can always tell. You can always tell the difference in my responses are pretty. And I'm often wrong. I've been wrong at least twice on this podcast so far, and I don't mind being corrected. That's the difference between me and a lot of other people.
That is a big thing. Yes.
I don't mind it when Rob says, "Oh no, Tom, that's not right." I'm like, "Oh, okay. Well, then what is right, Rob? Listen, let's all learn something today."
I would also say home theater has been very evolutionary.
That's true.
Tom has been, as you point out, consistently keeping up with everything that's going on in home theater from years and years ago, and then continued going through it, myself as well. So because it's evolutionary, you don't often see some gigantic, like literally completely new thing. It's a variation on something that existed before. So as far as having knowledge about a wide variety of products, I chalk it up to there are people who know stats of every sports team off the top of their head. I have no idea how they remember that, but they do. So some people are like, how does Rob remember model numbers and what features go with what? I'm like, for whatever reason, that works in my brain. Sports stats don't. So, it's a good thing that different people remember different things. It allows us to talk to one another and gain knowledge and rely on other people for information. So that's all I can chalk that up to. Learning about products that I don't know myself, I read a lot of manuals. I literally just read product manuals. And then for stuff, again, it's an experience thing, just having kept up with the evolution. It's like I can spot a lot of times in the manual where I'm like, I'm going to have to go look for a better explanation of that because I know that the manual isn't fully explaining it, just sort of based on experience of having read a lot of manuals. And then I'll hit a place like AVS Forum where there are tremendously knowledgeable people about very, very specific things. And it's a wonderful resource when you know what you're looking for. AVS Forum is tremendously useful. It can be bewildering if you're coming into it looking for a little bit more general information, where I like to think we step in and provide more helpful answers in that sense.
It's funny, Rob makes a good point about the baseball guys.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm sure in Rob's country, the hockey guys.
Yep.
The ability to have the stats and stuff on the top of your head and talk about ERAs and hitting percentages and pitches thrown or whatever. I don't know. I don't watch baseball. I've always been like, wow, couldn't you have spent your time on something else? But then again, you look at me and somebody says, what's my receiver's doing, cutting off for no reason. I'm like, oh yeah, you need to vacuum that thing. Mm-hmm. That is not general knowledge,
right?
But that is something I have experienced.
That's right. It's experience.
This is not the first time this has come up in my life.
That's right.
So to have somebody, somebody might look at that and go, wow, that's really obscure. I'm like, yeah, that's just Tuesday.
I think the consistency of it is the same thing too. Like, there are people who have followed one sports team their entire lives. They're like, how did you stay passionate about them? I don't know. They did. That's part of life. And for us, it happens to be home theater. Tom and I both are just into it. We like staying with it. And you know what? Honestly, this podcast is definitely part of why we're as up to date as we are. We might not be if not for the podcast, but because people, we are constantly surprised that we still have this many questions. We're like, haven't we answered almost every question?
I think we've answered all the questions. There's no more questions.
And we're like, well, nope.
At this point, we should just start doing the car talk guys thing and just do the best of and just complete things. The other thing too, and I don't know about Rob, but I know I'm this way. I can't scroll past a news feed that has a home theater related article in it and not click on it.
Right.
It's like not. I'm physically incapable of not reading it. I might not read every word of it, but like Rob said when he was looking through the manuals, it's gotten to the point now where I can skim through a review and this has been this way for a really long time, and just skim past all the BS and all the stuff, and I
Yep.
know what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
I know the sections to look for it at, and I know when I'm, I can kind of translate it from what I know the reviewer is actually trying to say versus what they actually
Yeah, so
said.
reading between the lines.
Yeah. So, and Rob's doing that with manuals, and I can do the same thing. I mean, it's almost like when you first start getting into whatever topic it is, you read every word and try to understand
Sure.
it, and then by the end, after you've gotten some knowledge, you just start, control effing for
Right.
certain terms, and you read about that, you're like, okay, I'm done with this, and then you go on. It's the same thing. So thank you for what I consider to be a compliment and kind words.
Very much so.
We will continue to do this whether you like it or not, 'cause apparently we can't stop. Got an addiction. Infinite Gary, he says the Audyssey mid-range compensation dip, whatever. Gene from Audioholics posted a tip saying to turn it off or set the Audyssey target curve to flat instead of reference, but Audyssey's own advice is to leave it on in pretty much all situations, since they say it is more about compensating for the uneven ratio of direct to reflected sound in that frequency range where the tweeter and mid-range driver are typically crossing over. What's our take? I think you won't hear the difference.
That's
what
pretty
I think.
much largely it.
I think this is more of a peace of mind thing, and many people have decided that if you put in anything that makes a not flat thing less not flat, then it's bad. And I'm telling you, I took it out the last time I ran Audyssey, and then I forgot to take it back out again the last time I ran Audyssey, and I can't hear a difference. And I've been doing this longer than most people. So
on top of that, Gene was incorrect in saying that if you set the target to flat, that takes out the mid-range compensation dip. It does not. If you have run Audyssey inside of your AV receiver or used the Audyssey editor app without removing the mid-range compensation dip, then it will be present in both the reference and the flat targets. It is present in both, so setting it to flat does not get rid of it. But you can remove it through the Audyssey editor app, or in old receivers that had Audyssey Pro, you could do it in there as well. But yeah, the way it appears in the Audyssey editor app visually on the graph that they show you is not what it actually is. It is more visible on the graph in the app. It is much more like a notch in real life. And hearing it is, turn it on, turn it off, do a blind comparison. You're probably never going to notice the thing. What Audyssey was doing there so again, it is like a measurement more than a actual subjective being able to hear it thing. They're largely correct. That is where most tweeters cross over to most mid-ranges or woofers, and you do get this intermodulation distortion that you can take out with this mid-range compensation dip that they've put in there. That's exactly what it's for, but not all speakers cross over there, and so, that's why they've basically acquiesced and allowed you to take it out with the Audyssey editor app now, but honestly, go ahead and do the comparison. You're never going to hear it.
Yeah. Tony found this on YouTube. Sorry for the lack of lip sync, sir.
Yes.
We try. And you recently watched and enjoyed Lee's review of the dual SVS SB2000 Pro subwoofer. Tony immediately added some SVS subs to his shopping list after that. In listening to some of our other episodes, he hasn't yet come across us talking about REW and is curious to hear our thoughts about it in a general sense. To him, he can foresee it quickly becoming a rabbit hole. So how effective do we think it is in helping to audibly improve your sound quality? REW, Room EQ Wizard.
Room EQ Wizard. Yeah. So first of all, maybe you have heard us talk about it, but we called it Room EQ Wizard instead of REW or RU.
Right.
But easily you have listened to episodes where it didn't happen to come up because we talk about whatever is asked of us. We certainly have talked about Room EQ Wizard on this podcast before, but I by no means expect someone to go through back the entire catalog of our episodes and hear them all. So I have no problem talking about it again.
Yeah, so Room EQ Wizard is a rabbit hole. I mean, that's all there is to it. So if you're first of all, if you're gonna get Room EQ Wizard and start taking measurements in your home theater, which is fine, just be knowledgeable. Do some reading about what you're actually going to be required to do to be effective and to make a difference, and be prepared to buy an external amp, maybe in a Dirac unit, more than likely, but. Also, if Herb has got his microphones back in, which I don't know if he does or not.
Yeah, it's a little questionable. Things are of course difficult. As
I would
far as
reach out to
right now.
Cross Spectrum Labs, because Cross Spectrum Labs is, and our friend Herb out there, he provides calibrated microphones with calibration, individual calibration curves for them, so that you can use it with a Room EQ Wizard. What does that mean? That means that he has a professional grade microphone, and he takes a measurement, and then he takes the microphone that you are purchasing from him, and he takes the same measurement in the same place and all that stuff, and then the professional microphone is accurate, and your specific microphone is not as accurate. So there are some like if the within that line of microphones, there's some known inaccuracies, right?
Sure.
So you could get like a general correction curve that will generally make every microphone from that manufacturer or from that line more accurate. But that's not what you're going to get. What you're going to get is your specific microphone will get a specific correction file that you can put into Room EQ Wizard, so that it makes it as accurate as it can be, or as close to the accuracy of the professional microphone. So now you are working with a $100-ish microphone that has been calibrated to a $10,000 microphone.
Yeah, that's right.
So you want to start there. So and the price bump up, if Herb has got his stuff in stock, is marginal compared to just buying the microphone out of the box.
It's like $15.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Herb is not making enough money on these things, as far as I'm concerned. So reach out to Cross Spectrum Labs. Do your research on Room EQ Wizard, and then be prepared to spend way too much time with this stuff, because it is a rabbit hole. It is a rabbit hole.
What I would say in a general sense for someone who's sort of starting into it, which I think might be the case here, it's well, it's a situation where you can very easily do too little, because if you are only measuring at one location and only looking at frequency response, say, or something like that, it doesn't paint the whole picture. And if you're trying to make adjustments to your sound system without getting the full picture, well, you're going to overcorrect in places, or you're going to target something that isn't actually beneficial throughout your whole listening area. It's literally only beneficial at that one point in space, and you have 2 ears, so right away you should be taking more than one location for your measurements. So the flip side of that is so you're never going to get the whole picture, but to get something closer to the whole picture, something that is actually useful, where you can start making decisions on what changes you can make to your system, it requires, there's no way around it, a lot of measurements. You have to take a lot of measurements to paint a more complete picture of what's going on in your room. And then you have to teach yourself to ignore your instinct to see small little squiggles and think they're a big deal. Because what we can hear versus what the calibrated microphone that Herb is selling you can pick up is very different, especially in the bass, which is where we largely care the most, especially about like electrical equalization that you might apply with a room correction program or Dirac or something like that. What we can hear in the bass versus what the microphone will pick up and show you on the graph are substantially different. So a lot of it is first realizing you're going to have to take the time to physically do a lot of measurements, and then not panicking, because you're going to see a whole bunch of squiggles, but very few of them actually matter. Right.
Yeah, we're looking for massive variations from plus or minus 3 dB, and that, especially when you're zoomed into it and you got your face like on your computer monitor, you're like, oh my God, look at all the squiggles. How am I going to make this flat? You're not. You don't have to, and you can't hear the difference anyways. So Tony's room is 12 by 15. He can close it off. There are French doors. The glass in those doors can rattle, and that's with his current pair of Sherwin Vega 12-inch subs from about 20 years ago. He's got a 5.2 configuration using Polk LSI 700 series speakers and the Yamaha RX A3070. He's using an 80 hertz crossover frequency. He sent along a single frequency response measurement, and what he noticed is that the mid-range and treble seem to fall within the frequency mentioned, plus or minus 3 dB range of the 75 dB target line. But as it goes down into the bass, the peaks and troughs of the graph seem to get bigger and bigger the lower it goes in frequency. Yeah. So what's our reaction to this measurement that he took? Would upgrading to SVS subs improve the frequency response? And more importantly, would it sound better? Let's see here. It looks like he's got down to about, starting at about, whoa, what is that? 3? Is that 10 dB? Has he got a 10 dB difference there?
Yeah,
Is
so
that what I'm looking at?
if we're looking at sort of 75 dB was the target, that's the signal sweep being sent, then yeah, some of the peaks in the lowest bass around 30 hertz gets up to, it looks about 85, maybe 86, so it's maybe plus 10 dB at that point. And then the lowest trough is just a little below 70. Looks about 110, 120, something like that hertz. So it's not minus 10, it's like maybe minus 7, something like that. So you're like minus 7 to plus 10 seems to be like the worst of the range.
70 hertz or so. Like his variance is plus or minus 5.
Yes.
Like all the way up, which is pretty good.
Pretty good. Like we were saying, it looks scarier on the graph than it is in real life, and compared to what you can actually hear, this is very likely not bad at all.
Right. So let's talk about your room. First of all, the French doors. This seems like the job for like museum putty or some sort of like foamy electrical, or plumber's tape.
Plumber's tape.
You can kind of like shove in there and around the door just to kind of shim it and give it something to vibrate against in multiple places. You may find you have to do that along your door jamb as well. That's what I had to do in my room. I have little pieces of this black foam tape in my door jamb because the doors were rattling like freaking crazy in here. And I still get some rattles in here at certain frequencies. And it's probably the windows, and I just don't care enough to go try to figure it out. So, and actually, I think on some level, hearing a rattle every once in a while just makes me smile.
Sure.
It's just like, yep. That's not happening in other people's home theaters. So, will you get better or will it sound better if you have SVS subs? Will it be better if you have SVS subs? I mean, you're having a frequency response all the way down to 20 hertz now. You definitely need to tame some of those peaks way down there, I think. Anything below like 70 or 60 maybe needs to be kind of tamed down, but you can do that with should be doing that with your receiver. But the A3050, I'm not sure what is that right?
3070, I think it was, yep.
I'm not sure how much it actually does in the bass as far as
that's the flagship, so that's as good as YPOW gets. And it definitely does. It goes all the way down to 16.5 hertz, I think, is the lowest that it goes.
So that means that what's going on here is already being tamed down as much as it possibly can.
Well, I mean, hearkening back to what I was saying in the first part of the question, this is an incomplete picture. We're seeing one frequency response graph from one measurement location. We don't know what's happening in the seat neck. We don't know what's happening in the ear next to you. This could be the measurement that's happening at your left ear. We don't know what's happening at your right ear. And it can be slightly or sometimes substantially different. So this is an incomplete picture. It might be the reason you still have some humps and troughs even after having run YPOW, because in one location, because YPOW will get you to take multiple microphone positions, in one location you've got a big hump, but in another location at the very same frequency you've got a big trough, so the equalization can't act on both of those and make both of them better. It has to split the difference, and you end up with some remaining peaks and troughs at this one location where you happen to take the measurement that you sent to us. So you would need to take more measurements at multiple locations so that we can get a better idea of the uniformity across your entire listening. We don't even know what
microphone he's using with this too. I mean, we could be seeing tons of inaccuracy within that microphone.
It could be
at those lower
SPL meter
as well.
Yeah, it could be that. But then on top of that, would just getting SVS subs and putting them in the exact same spots as your current Suro and Vega subs produce tremendously different results? No, we would expect them to be very similar results. You might get a little bit deeper extension than what you already have, although you've already got pretty darn good extension. You might have more headroom available. You might have a little bit lower distortion or a little bit less overhang or something like that. But the overall frequency response, if they're in the same locations, we wouldn't expect to instantly change. We would expect it to stay the same. Then you might be able to play with fully variable phase on the SVSs that I don't know if the Servo and Vegas you have offered fully variable phase. They probably just had a 0-180 polarity switch. Most subwoofers, especially going back, they might not have even had that. They might have had no adjustment to phase or polarity whatsoever. So there might be tuning options in the phase available to you with the SVS subs, even if they're physically in the same locations that you didn't have, that could make your response more uniform and then allow the equalization of YPOW to work even more effectively and flatten out those troughs and peaks.
Yeah, the 12 by 15 foot room makes me think placement options are limited, probably at best. So what Rob's saying, I completely agree with. If you just plop down 2 new subs in the same places that your subs currently are, I would not expect there to be a substantive difference between the response. What you did not tell us, other than the placement of where your subs currently are, is anything else about your room other than the fact that it has French doors that rattle. So, before I bought new subs, you've already got 2 subs. Before I bought new subs, I would be looking at talking to you about placement of subs, getting them placed properly, diagonally or mirrored in your room. So middle of the front wall, middle of the back wall, middle of the side wall, middle of the other side wall, or in opposing corners would be the placement options that I would point you towards. And then I would start talking to you about bass trapping and room acoustics and getting some absorption in your room.
Which could definitely help with, say, the dip that's going on there at about 110, 120 hertz. That is definitely where corner bass trapping could have an effect just passively, for sure.
Once we've done those things, then we're going to start talking about sub 20 hertz bass. And that's what we're not seeing in this at all. Plus all the other stuff Rob said about multiple measurements and other things to get a better idea of what's happening in your room. So there's a process that we're going to go through if we want to make this look better. It doesn't start with Room EQ Wizard and a microphone.
Yeah, I mean, I do want to say, he might not have heard, I've got a 12-step guide to setting up dual subwoofers that I've written up at avrant.com. You can just search for 12-step guide AVRant and it'll come up in Google. But that I wrote up without use of any measurement equipment or Room EQ Wizard at all, strictly just based on your ears and playing some bass sweeps on repeat. So again, there is a disconnect between how scary it might look on a graph versus what it actually sounds like to your ears. And I will always come back to, what does it sound like with my ears? That's really what I care about. If there is a dip that I can see in a graph but I can't hear it, I really don't care. What do I care that I can see it but can't hear it? Hearing it is the important part. So, yeah, you can check that out as well.
I just, it's just so hard. I mean, I know that when we get into these things, and then there becomes a level of realization, as you've been doing this for a long time. We were talking about, our history with it. People get very invested in what they've purchased. And you and I have gotten to the point now where we no longer care. I'm able to look at my gear and go, it's all right. And people have a very hard time saying that about anything they own. Well, they got a car or whatever, and they're like, "Oh, it's the best purchase I've ever made." I just spent. Why would I spend $30,000 on something I didn't like?
It's perfection being the enemy of good or great.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's we have the ability to look past some of this stuff. So looking at these graphs and seeing those squibbles and going, oh, it's not flat. I'm going for flat. Well, like, you're going for relatively flat.
Yes.
That's the part we always kind of forget to mention. We're not going for a straight line. You can theoretically in an anechoic chamber get a speaker or a set of speakers to give you that flat line. I mean, that's theoretically possible. But in the real world situation, in a real room, it's not only impractical, it's mind-numbingly maddening to try to even attempt to get there. So, what we are looking at is, how bad is it? And your line, honestly,
that's right.
It's a pretty good line.
It's really not too bad.
As it stands, it's you're like, I got a little extra bass at the bottom end. Like, hey, a lot of people, they're asking us if they can get permission to bump up their bass at the bottom end because they like it, and you got it naturally. So good on you. But that's a pretty good looking line to me. I'd be happy with that line. But again, that line does not tell the whole story, and we need to investigate further. So get back with us. All right, Rob, who do we have left?
Whoa, okay. I didn't know we were stopping there. I was hoping to
We're
get through
stopping
two
there.
more.
It is now storming outside.
Okay.
And the dog, they let the dog in here because she got afraid, which means it must be thundering. So we're going to go before I lose power.
Okie doke. Well, in that case, we have Jules, Terry G, Dennis R, Aris V, Art B, an anonymous who wrote in, and Tony K still on the list. We will do our best to get to everybody next week.
All right. I want to thank our... Ooh, I got to scroll back. We're going to thank our listeners of the week. We're going to thank our 124 patrons over at patreon.com, including Carl, Tom, and Nelson, as well as Carl and Philippe for talking us up for Accessories for Less, and Don for talking us up to Gary Kubian and SVS, and our notes of gratitude from Carl, Nelson, Tom, Gurinder, Andrew, Daniel, Ares, Art, and Philip, whatever. Dude, tell us how to say your name. Thank you.
Tom clearly wants to go, so I'll just say patreon.com/AVRant podcast. Anybody who wants to sign up, thanks to our 124 patrons, including Carl, Tom, and Nelson. And I'll just repeat the names real quick so that I have said them. Carl, Felipe, and Don, thank you for talking us up to Accessories for Less and SVS, respectively. And then Carl, Nelson, Tom, Gurinder, Andrew, Daniel, Aris, Art, and Felipe, thank you very much for those notes of gratitude. They are very much appreciated.
For AVRant, I'm Tom Andry.
And I'm Rob H. Now stay in and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.